Oh, we got a couple of people coming in right now.
Elizabeth may have been trying to say something, but I wasn't able to hear her. Were you?
Nope.
Okay.
Oop.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Now we can.
Sorry, I was like, this is really awkward. I'm not, I don't think anyone can hear me. But I'll keep monitoring the waiting room if you want to get started. And I did hit record to start recording a minute ago, and I did announce it. So I'm very sorry that that wasn't heard, but I wanted to make sure that everyone was informed that recording began.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. So my name is Rebecca Harrington. I am the health educator at SUNY Oneonta. I am also the lead developer of SPARC and TRAC. I've been involved with this kind of long going program now since I think it was 2016 that we got underway. I've successfully used these programs on my own campus now for 3 full years. This will be going into my 4th year. So I'm excited because it means that we'll have in higher education, of having that full 4 years to know that at this point, we'll be reaching nearly 100% of students who have had this experience over others. So if you've been following along, this is week 5 out of a planned 11 weeks, 1 week to coordinate with each chapter of a book that was published last year on the SPARC website, the website where you download all the other stuff. Let's see, our goals for this week is to really dig into the quizzes side of content and thinking through how to utilize quizzes, customizing quizzes, and then also looking into Articulate Storyline and looking at how do you build a quiz and how do you get it to function and do the things that you want it to do. So this is I feel like this is the week where we really start to shift more into less thinking about what we're going to put in there and really getting into like the fun parts of Articulate Storyline, the software. So that said, if this is the first webinar you've participated in, to customize SPARC or TRAC, you will need to get a license of Articulate Storyline. The educational version fee for Storyline 3 is about $700. Make sure you reach out and get an educational license pricing. There's also something called Articulate Storyline 365, and that's a month-by-month cost. So I think it works out roughly to about the same amount of money in terms of a year 1 kind of a thing. But I know with budgets being tight, you know, there's this kind of this balance of, is it better to pay a little bit of money each month so you have what you need, and maybe you turn off that automatic renewal so that you stop having access to Storyline once you're up and running, or do you pay that one-time purchase to get what you need and you know that you've got access to it for a couple of years? My guess is that we're not close to seeing Articulate Storyline 4 for some time, because when we started this project, Articulate Storyline 2 was still that the mainstay, and they were offering, like, if you spent a little extra money, you could get an upgrade to Storyline 3. So in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was kind of the messaging that we were moving close to that. This is the website where you can log in. The bit.ly is just a shorter version of the longer URL right here. This is where you will find the book that is there. There's also all kinds of files there to help you get up and running. There are free zip files that you can get into your campus LMS so you can test that portion. So it's the Oneana version of SPARC and TRAC that you can just get up and running, try it, test it out, see what that part of the process looks like. And there's also the .story files, which are the Articulate Storyline files that you can open up and start customizing and building off of right away. So that said, so let's jump into the content for this week. This goes along with chapter 5. And really thinking about the quizzes and thinking about how do you want to use quizzes in, I think in general, we think about when we're using quizzes, we're using them to assess learning. And, you know, I think we also use quizzes maybe partway through lectures, or we do like the interactive things like Kahoot or Poll Everywhere. And the feedback kind of works two ways, right? As the faculty person providing content, we can ensure that students are getting the content and understanding it, but it also provides students that opportunity like, oh, do I get it? Does nobody get it? Does everybody get it but me? And so they get their own feedback on their own learning. And at the end of the day, those kinds of short little quizzes provide a lot of interactivity to the content. They're a point to pause the lecture. We tend to do better learning wise when we learn in little chunks, and then we can move on and do something else. So as opposed to just being at the passive end of receiving, having that moment to ask questions. So in terms of utilizing a program like this, it's more like a MOOC, a massive online course, where, like, for me, a fall semester is typically 18 to 1900 students taking this course all at the same time. So the way we want to utilize quizzes is going to be different because we don't really have the time along the way to assess the student learning. Like the student, we need to provide the information to the student. We might need the student to be able to assess what their own learning is. So for me, when I built SPARC, and I was thinking about how I want to put quizzes in there, I finally kind of came to this idea of that I really need the quizzes as that point to stop reading, stop listening, and interact with the content that you've been exposed to. And do you have the right answer at this point? Because truthfully, we don't want students to be able to go through a whole bunch of content about affirmative consent and then get the question wrong. And I think there's also some good neuropsych that would support that as well. The myth fact messaging, and this kind of came out of the social norms research, where when people did like Mythbusters themed posters where we said, oh, everybody thinks everybody drinks, but most people don't. What we found is that when you present people with a myth that is the one that they likely to believe, it just really increases the depth of that synapse, that you walk away with having the myth reinforced because it takes more cognitive effort to rewrite that. And I think we also see that with cognitive bias. And there's been lots of exposure to that recently of looking at how it is really difficult to rewrite people's scripts. So for me, I did not want somebody to be able to hit the wrong answer on a quiz and then really be able to still persist through the content. So no, we need to stop. We need to get the answer right, and then you can go on. So I use it as a way to work our way through the navigation. There's a point where you're not going to get new content until you get the answer right. And I'll be able to show you that in the layout when we switch over to Articulate Storyline in just a second. So in terms of building quizzes within Articulate, there's two options. You can utilize a wizard kind of a form, and I'm going to show you what that looks like today, or you can build it yourself, which is ultimately what I ended up doing. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. You have a little bit more design control when you build it yourself. I don't know, you just have a lot more control. And I guess ultimately that's where I went. And there's a lot of, I guess, just gut check kind of feelings that it just made it seem a little bit stronger. There's a little bit about the wizard that looks a little bit, I don't know, it just looks formulaic in a lot of ways. And so that way I could change up each of those quizzes. They weren't looking the same every single time. No matter what, you still need your question, you still need your answer choices. And the other thing that you need to also consider are your feedback messages. So what do you know, it's really easy to put like a little thing up that says, you got this correct, or you got this wrong, let's try it again. But maybe thinking a little bit deeper of like, that was a good choice, but it wasn't the best choice. Or maybe you picked one and maybe it's a choose all that will apply. So how do we put some little educational messages? And it was interesting because I never really thought through all of those little extra moments of breadcrumbs, like thinking through every possible way that students might intersect with something. I've played around also with the, like if the student's getting frustrated and they keep getting the incorrect thing too many times, like is there a way that you can also program in like the, okay, you've tried it like 16 times, let's give you a backdoor so you can continue and not be frustrated with this. So you can control that kind of stuff too. And then, you know, in terms of going through the quizzes, and again, you're free to use all of the stuff that we've created. You don't have to change any of it, but I think you could also consider, how do you make this reflective of your campus? Can you use names that are reflective to the population on your campus? Can you use places? Are there other little campus lingo things that just make sense, it resonates with your campus? I would say one of the tricks that I often employ is I go and Google search. So let's see, this is the class of, you know, kids coming into fall 2020 were born 2002 to 2004. Sometimes I'll go in and I'll look at what are the most common names for that birth year. If I know that I've got a large population from another country, then I'll make sure that that's also represented. Or if I know like a geographic area, you can really hone in on that stuff in Google. So it's, you know, it's going to reflect and it's going to make sense and resonate with your students. So that said, what are we going to look at with the software today? And we're going to get ready to switch over to Articulate Storyline in just a heartbeat here. But here's the list. We looked at master slide view before, and that's something that is similar to PowerPoint. So there's also feedback master slide view. So if you are going to use the onboard quiz feature, that quiz wizard, you're going to want to think about also working with your feedback slide view, which is basically the same thing, but it's all of the question and answer and response slides. And then we're going to add a quiz through a quiz wizard. I've already built one, so we can take a look at a finished one, and then I can show you how that got built. We're going to look at submit buttons, which is a slightly different thing because there's some coding that comes with it. And then I'm also going to take you through slide layers, and we're going to look at some of the quizzes that are in the current Storyline SPARC, and you can see what that looks like and why you might start to see why you might want to choose to go that route. So that said, I'm going to stop sharing that, and we're going to switch over to Articulate. So we're going to come over here right away. You can see I've been pulling up some slides to get them ready. So here's Articulate's kind of master view, story view, where we can see all of the slides. So here's my module 1, my module 2. Storyline refers to these as scenes. And if I want to add a new scene, I can click right up here. The red flag defaults and tells me what our first scene is. So I've added this little scene over here for today so that we can take a look at what, you know, have a little playground area here. So I'm going to come over to there. Here's our quiz that we built. I always like to default to movies when I'm doing, anytime I can mention the Goonies, I feel is a good thing to do. So here it is. So this is a quiz slide that I've already created. And the big difference here between this and any other slide is that there is a form view and a slide view. So I can go back and forth between kind of the guts of what's going on and what it's going to look like for the end user. So let's come over here. I'm going to click form view. And here's all of my information. So here's my question. Here's my responses. If I've changed my mind in the last hour since I built this, I can do that. So I'm adding on right here, what is the correct answer? We can add extra kinds of, let's see, I'm trying to think, 16 candles. So we can add all kinds of different options there. And then down here is our little feedback. So here's what the correct screen is going to be when somebody picks the right choice. And here's the message that they're going to get if they pick the wrong choice. So let's come back over here to slide view. And if I preview this slide, I'm just going to give it a second. It's going to crunch its way through. This is always a good sign when you get to that little sunflower. So here's our little quiz slide. If I pick the wrong answer and I hit submit, there's that incorrect response. I'm going to come over here and replay that slide. I'll double check it with the Goonies. Okay, so I had turned that off. I think, what did I change my mind to? I believe it was the Breakfast Club here. And here we go. Here's our correct message. So these are the places where you do get to design all of these things and think about all of that stuff. So, you know, thinking about, you know, do you have phrases on campus? I mean, I think the correct, I don't know, I find this stuff really dry. So I do encourage you to think through like what's going to make this a little bit more engaging for students. And then Articulate also allows you to put in these results slides. I ended up not using these ultimately because, again, I find them very formulaic, and to me, this content is more important than a score on a test. This is about understanding and knowledge and being hopefully able to apply knowledge. And I think also when we're asking students to learn this content as they're coming into our campuses, it also puts down that this is an important thing to this campus. So I think some of the feels that I want, I don't think there's a pass fail on that. I think there's we're doing better, we want you to do better, and move you along that continuum. So I've moved away more from results. The other thing to consider is that when you're taking something out of Articulate Storyline and you're moving it into your LMS system, it's only going to return one value back to your LMS system. So ultimately, and we'll talk about this when we get to the week where we're going to talk about getting it ready for your LMS, but it is good to know that you're going to get to return one value. So do you want it to be a quiz result? Do you want it to be just the student completed so many slides? And ultimately, that's what I ended up doing because I felt that was the most fail-safe way of dealing with it. If I know that there's a module and there's 13 slides, then I can set it to say that once the student has viewed 12 slides, I know that they have answered all the quizzes correctly because that's the only way they could have seen 12 out of the 13 slides. Then I know for sure that that's a pass. They've achieved all of the content that I've wanted them to get. So those are things to think about. So let's come back over here and let's add a new slide. So if we want to create a quiz, we're going to come up here to new slide and we're going to choose this graded question option. And we have all of these different types of graded options: multiple choice, multiple response, there's true, false. There are these drag and drop activities. Drag and drop activities are not completely accessible activities, so I would recommend you not work with those at this point. And I think that's one of the downsides of Articulate Storyline is they have all this content and they don't let you know that. So let's create another multiple choice question. So we're going to just do insert slide, and it comes right up here to this new thing. So and just like that, we can start adding content. And then you'll notice that it picked this background over here, and I can change that very easily. I'm going to right click that. I am working on a PC, and I can click apply layout and have a blank slide there. And that's going to update in just a second. When we come over here to slide view, you'll notice that it's really kind of all over the place. Let's see, each of these little pieces are seen as a smaller chunk within a thing. I can also add that choice there, but I can move it around, get it where I want it to go. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. It does allow you to get content in there very quickly. I do think that there are places where this would really be applicable. And while we're talking about Storyline right now in the context of SPARC and TRAC, I do think it's a really great skill to have this software on board. So what would you want to do with this? And you could potentially use this to put quizzes together or review cards for students if you're teaching classes. It would be a really quick way to get content together. And then you can make it all work out on the long run. So you can add an insert, you can insert a results slide the same way. There are some other options that you can do over here in terms of how do you want to score this. I haven't played around with that a whole lot. You can get it to shuffle the answers so that every time we come back to this slide, the answers are going to appear in a different place. We can say that there's a result slide, and we're going to have to connect those two things. So Articulate has something called variables engaged with it. Variables are what drive coding on the internet. A variable is just kind of a folder that's going to hold a piece of information. So when we create a quiz, a variable gets made for that quiz. It's going to hold the result of that. And then the results slide is going to be told to look in the folder for that slide and pull that information forward. Other places where you can use variables, you could ask a student their name, and then at the end you could say certificate of completion, and you put a little wild card in there. It'll pull the information out and it'll bring that person's name into that. So variables are really fun. You know, they're getting more into the advanced skills, but knowing that they're there and kind of working behind the scenes, and that's what's driving a quiz in this kind of situation. I think that's a good piece of knowledge to have. So we can get into the design here. We can change how these little buttons look over here. We can do lots of little fun design things. But again, I think at the end of the day, you're dealing with this stuff. I think with attempts, you know, you do want to put unlimited attempts. That's another accessibility thing. So getting into the habit of doing that when you're creating a quiz through this quiz wizard. But let's talk about what it looks like to do a quiz that we just kind of build it all on our own. And this is what we have over here. So I have a stocking quiz that we built for students, and it looks like I have a little piece of content there that's in the way. So here's what we set up for a quiz, and this is the one that is in the SPARC. So you and your friend are coming out of a student meeting at night. You see your friend's X hanging around and waiting. The X has been showing up wherever your friend is despite being asked to stop. What action are you most likely to take? This is a situation where I wanted to introduce the fact that there's often multiple ways to deal and handle a scenario. So what we did is we actually created lots of different options that were all really good, so that a student could maybe find the one that they felt most comfortable with. And in this case, these are the slide layers over here, and this is what's going to provide the information back to the student. When they do correct, we can reinforce that. So there's also that opportunity where maybe you can use your quiz to do a different kind of the learning, and it becomes a different way to express some information and education. So I'm not sure why I have a not quite right thing, because there's I think maybe this is if you hit the retry, or if you hit the submit button and you haven't clicked any of the boxes, you're going to see this message. But for the most part, everybody's going to see this. And here's why that next button to get continuing on to the next slide. And in this pane over here, you can see here's all of the slides. Here's the directions. So they've completed stocking. They're going to get a results slide. We ended each of the chunks of content with some information, getting them to some resources, a nice little summary slide, and then they can go on to the next chunk. So in that case, we're looking at stocking. Let's look at harassment. So here's another situation where we have a more than one answer is a correct answer. And all of the information that is driving that is over here on this right side. And we talked about triggers last week. So this is kind of like getting to the next layer of understanding triggers. So if we want to come back to this nice little slide about Rebecca's favorite 80s movie. So how can we build this without having to utilize that quiz wizard? So let's add a new slide. We're going to do just a basic slide. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Where's my layouts here? Here's a basic layout. We're going to insert some text. So what we can do here is we can start adding some checkboxes, because we're going to need people to be able to tell us some information. So we're going to use radio buttons. Radio buttons are what we use when there's only one correct answer. Checkboxes are what we use when there's multiple correct answers. So I like this one, put that right there. I'm going to need a couple of those. I'm going to do those hotkeys of Control-C and Control-V. These are going to be all over the place here. So I'm going to select all of them by dragging and dropping. and I'm going to come up here to this align menu and I can align them center. So now they're all lined up perfectly vertical. The other thing I can do in align is I can do this thing called distribute vertically. So now the spacing is really nice between all of those. I'm going to also Control C and Control V a text box. Not quite sure ones I said not to. I know Goonies was in there. I know Princess Bride was in there because for me that's a close second. So I'm just adding quickly all these little text boxes. Let's just get these kind of connected to their bubble so we can identify which one they are. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back up here into this timeline. So here's all of our radio buttons. Here's all of our text boxes. And we've talked about this in some of the previous webinars that it's really important to be able to identify the pieces on your slide and what they are so you can find them. So I'm going to just rename these things right here. I tend to do like the 8-character or less kind of thing because you just need to be able to cue yourself in. So this is where it gets really important, right? Because we want to know which button goes with which one. So let's just, Breakfast Club. So that's the first part that we're going to need to make this happen, right? So we're going to come back to the code in a second. What we also need to think about is we're going to need those slide layers to have the correct and the incorrect. So here's where the slide layers are going to show up. Here's our bottom slide. We can name our slide. Now I'm going to come over here. We're going to come up to the slides menu, not the slides menu. We want to do insert. Insert a slide layer for correct. We want to insert a slide layer for incorrect. I'm going to name those. When I click these, you'll notice that the bottom layer gets grayed out. I'm going to pull this back down again so we can see this. The other thing, I'm not sure if we talked about this, is right down here in this lower right-hand corner. You're probably familiar with this from the Microsoft Suite, is I can get that slide to fill up the whole way. Or if I click this little icon right here, it'll just make it as big as will possibly fit in there. So let's talk about, we're going to need to have a correct layer. We'll make a big rectangle. We'll say, you got it right. And on the incorrect, we'll do the same thing. We're going to do try again. Now we got to add some interactivity to all of this. So what might we want to do? Well, we definitely want, if somebody correctly chooses this one, we want to be able to get them to the correct layer. And if they choose any of the other ones, we want them to see the incorrect layer. So let's start over here with the correct one. This one's going to be the easiest thing. So we're going to have this Goonies button is selected. So we're going to do a trigger and we want to show a layer. We want to show a layer. Which layer do we want to show? We want to show the correct layer. So when, this is when a user clicks, and this is going to be a state because this is an on. And so as soon as we choose state, now it's going to give us all of the objects that could possibly have a state. And I want to find that Goonies button. And I don't want that Goonies button to be normal. I want that Goonies button to be selected. So let's walk through that logic again. We clicked on the Goonie button. We clicked add a trigger. What's the trigger? We want a layer to be shown. Which layer to be shown? We want the correct layer. When the state, because a specific function of that interactive unit that we put on there, and we're going to choose just this one, is selected. And there was a lot of different opportunities in here. And if you want to create your own state, you can do that. It'll magically show up in there. And we're going to say okay. Now we also need to know when to show incorrect. So we are going to do another one. We're going to show a layer. we're going to show the layer incorrect when the state of all of these other objects. But what we want to do is, unless they choose all three, that's going to be a problem. So we need to show conditions here. And this is where it starts to get a little bit into the nitty gritty. So we're going to add a condition. If breakfast club is equal to selected, we're going to add. Now this is the first condition. Once we start adding conditions, we can do ands or ors. Let's see, we don't want that one. Let's see, we need this one. Princess Bride. Oop, I screwed that one up. I can come back over here and edit that. We want that to be selected. And here's another or. It's equal to selected. So if I'm double checking my logic here. It's been a while since I've done one of these. So, but if any one of these is selected, we want to see the incorrect layer. So if all of these, I think we can skip that. If Goonies is normal and one of these is selected, it's going to show us that incorrect one. And that's what we want to get to. So it ends up having a whole heck of a lot of code over here, but I do think that there's some good logic. The nice thing is that you can test this stuff over and over and over again and make sure you have it right. So if we come back over here to, let's see, let's look at the stocking one again. Actually, I'm going to come back up here because I know our relationship violence one. I think a lot of these have like the choose all to apply, but if we go and open up one of these edit codes here. So we have all of these different possibilities that are going to make it show us one layer or another layer. So it's a little bit more complicated to go this route, but I think ultimately you get a little bit more control and you get a little bit more control over the design. Another way that you can navigate through quizzes, and let's say I want to come back over here, affirmative consent. Here's a situation where we did a lot of layers to talk people through identifying affirmative consent. And I'm going to open this up over here so you can see all of the different layers that I built into this slide. So right here, we start with here's the base slide. This is the first part that students see. When they click next, it says right here, it's going to show them the layer is clear. So instead of, it's going to take forever to get this to run through preview mode because there's so many layers to this slide and so much artwork. So what we have here is a way of taking people through a couple of different options. So here's the is clear one. So here's two choices we're asking them to read. Walter and Chance are kissing. Walter begins to kiss Chance on the neck and then continues lower to Chance's chest. Chance seems to pause. Walter has two choices in this opportunity. Walter keeps going. He figures that if Chance doesn't like it, Chance would say something, or Walter stops and asks, is it okay to kiss you here? And waits for Chance to respond yes before continuing. So we asked them to click right on the scenario that illustrates affirmative consent. And then from there, it kind of branches out. So they might choose the correct one, they might choose the incorrect one. And so what it provides us the opportunity to is they can still see both options, but now we can do some reinforcing education as they navigate their self through. So I think it's a little bit more engaging than just the standard quiz. In terms of how we dealt with this module where we're talking about sexual assault, relationship violence, stalking, and harassment, affirmative consent is such a big part of 129B. This has got the most robust chunk of content to navigate through in quiz fashion over the other ones because it just really needs to be a huge chunk of what's going on. But it's a nice way to work through all of those main points of 129B. So we take them through that. If they've chosen incorrect, we have this red X. This wasn't clear. We have this chance to Walter's putting his own pleasure ahead of Chance's. We can correct what's going on there. So it takes them through all of these different stories where they're seeing students having to make real life choices. And these are places where I work with students to develop content. So again, if it's something that you can use, I want you to be able to have access to that. And I think that is what I have. I'm going to pull back up my own PowerPoint slide here. I think we showed you all of the different things that you can do. So it's a little bit deeper. You will have access to the recording of this. So you can kind of see how all of those quizzes were built again. I also really encourage you to go into the storyline file and muck around with it and see what's going on under the hood. Again, it's so easy to change out words and artwork. You can see how it was built and you can see what all of those different little triggers are. So let me pull this back down here so you can see. In this case, these are really just navigational triggers that we're doing because they pick the right answer by clicking a box, or they pick the wrong answer and they get to the right slide, and it pulls them up through that whole, all of those 6 things all the way up through here. So with that said, I am going to open it up for questions. Feel free to ask any question that has maybe just where you're at in your own personal journey with SPARC and TRAC. You know, whatever is, you know, I think this is one of those projects where it's so huge that you end up with worries and they become like the stumbling block. And I want to be able to address whatever is out there. And I'll stop share, but if there is a question that needs articulate, we can pop back in there as well. So you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or feel free to use the group chat box. I do have that open so I can see what's going on.
Rebecca, it seems like you did a really good job. Just answered all of the questions.
I hope it's that option. I'm also aware of, like, I feel like sometimes when I talk, it's also like the dog, like what was the Maxell tapes with the dog, like, you know, like everybody's blown. I've met a few people who talk like I do, and I've had that experience from the other side. So I hopefully didn't say anything that was so scary that people will be afraid to jump in. We are getting into more of the advanced stuff, but a little bit at a time, you totally can figure this stuff out. I will put my email address in the chat box. I'm happy to entertain questions. If you want to send me an email, we'll do my best. I've had a couple of folks where they're having meetings with people on their campus, and you know, you want to bring me in on speakerphone or on a Zoom call because you've got a few people who are assisting, and maybe I'll have some questions. I'm happy to jump on that as well. I'm just really glad to have more people in the sandbox playing with me right now.
Rebecca, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your willingness to always help with this stuff. You are a treasure. Thank you.
You are welcome.
So folks, Rebecca's email is in the chat box, and we will be sending this recording out and posting it on the SPARC webpage, as Rebecca noted.
Cindy, is that a hand wave there? Go ahead and unmute if you want to.
Just saying a good job again.
Oh, well, thank you. I totally appreciate that. I feel like the having to work through like the internet has really changed things. So appreciate you unmuting yourself so I had a voice.
Well, Rebecca, I don't want to keep you and keep folks, but thank you so much again for this and for inventing SPARC and saving campuses across the country. hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
going to hit stop recording.
Sounds good.